The Man in the Badgy Forts. The white glove landed flat against the man's back and shoved him through the smoked glass doors of the sapphire room like he was a spilled drink getting mopped off the floor. Gold chips stopped clicking. 200 people in tailored suits turned to watch, and not one of them looked away out of decency. The pit boss straightened his cuff, smiled at the room, and said it loud enough for the chandeliers to hear. "This room's for high rollers, folks, not tourists in flip-flops." The man in the baggy shorts stumbled, caught himself on a marble column, and did not turn around. He just stood there a moment, with his hands in his pockets. 90 minutes from now, every executive in this building would be standing in a conference room on the 60th floor, waiting for that same man to pick up a pen. But nobody in the sapphire room knew that yet. Not the whales. Not the dealers. And definitely not the pit boss, who'd just thrown $200 million out the door for wearing sandals. Let me back up. Because the way a night like this starts tells you everything about how it ends. The Solstice Grand sat at the north end of the Las Vegas Strip. 42 floors of glass and cold blue light. The kind of place where a bottle of water cost $11 and nobody blinked. That afternoon, a gray taxi pulled up to the valet lane, and out stepped a heavyset man in cargo shorts, an oversized t-shirt gone soft from too many washes, rubber sandals, and a plastic watch he'd probably bought at a gas station. He carried his own bag. He tipped the driver too much and thanked him by name. The valet, a young guy named Terrell Hayes, blinked at him. "You checking in, sir?" "Just walking around first," the man said. "Get a feel for a place before you settle in." "Old habit." He smiled, and it was an easy, tired smile, the kind that had seen a lot of rooms. "You have a good one, Terrell." Terrell watched him shuffle off toward the casino floor and figured him for a lost tourist who'd wandered up from a cheaper hotel. He wasn't wrong that the man looked out of place. He was wrong about everything else. The man's name was Adam Sandler, and 30 years ago he'd been broke enough to sleep on a friend's couch in Queens, doing 5-minute sets at midnight comedy clubs for a plate of eggs and a bus token. He remembered every one of those rooms. He remembered watching them from the back. Always the back, because from the back you could see who was really running the place, and who was just wearing the uniform. He'd never lost the habit. He owned a film studio now, a beloved one, and half of Las Vegas had spent 3 months trying to get him to sign a deal. But he'd flown in a day early, told nobody, and walked into the Solstice Grand like a man with nothing, because that was the only way he knew how to find out the truth about a place, before he tied his name to it. He drifted through the casino. He watched, and near the roped edge of the high-limit lounge, he found the one thing that made him stop. Her name was Simone Booker, and she'd been carrying a tray of drinks through the Sapphire Room for 11 years. She was 51, worked a double most nights, and had a daughter, Nia, halfway through nursing school across town. When Adam sat down at the far end of the lounge bar, still in his shorts and sandals, 3 other servers had already walked past him like he was furniture. Simone didn't. She set down a glass of ice water without being asked, slid a little bowl of pretzels next to it, and leaned in like they were old friends. "Sit as long as you like, hon," she said. "Everybody's welcome at my bar. You want a menu, or you just here to breathe a minute?" "Just breathing," Adam said. "Long flight." "Then breathe." She winked and moved on. He watched her work the room for the next 20 minutes. She remembered the whales' drinks before they ordered. She caught an old man about to tip over off his stool and steadied him without making it a thing. She slipped a folded 20 of her own tips to a busboy who'd broken a glass and looked terrified about the deduction. Adam Sandler had spent 30 years learning to spot the person who actually holds a room together, and it's never the loudest one. It was almost never the one wearing the fancy jacket, either. Which brings us to Darius Vaughn. Darius was the pit boss of the Sapphire Room, and he wore that title like a crown he'd been born to. He was 44, sharp-suited, with a white pocket square folded into a perfect blade, and he called himself the gatekeeper of the Solstice's high-limit floor to anyone who'd listen. In his mind, the Sapphire Room was clean because he kept it clean, and keeping it clean meant knowing, on sight, who belonged and who didn't. He'd built his whole self around that talent. He was very proud of it. And that pride was about to cost him everything, though he'd have laughed in your face if you'd told him. Darius spotted Adam at the bar around 9:15. He circled once, slow, taking in the shorts, the sandals, the plastic watch, the glass of free ice water Simone had poured. He didn't see a man. He saw a problem. He walked up to Simone at the service station, close enough that she had to step back, and said it low. "Who's the beach bum?" "He's a guest, Darius. He's fine. He's just resting. He's got no credit line, no comp, and he's drinking my water in my lounge in sandals." Darius adjusted his cuff. "Don't waste champagne on strays, Simone. It's a bad look for the room." She held his eyes for 1 second longer than was safe. Then she looked down. She had a daughter in nursing school and a schedule that Darius controlled, and they both knew it. That's the part these stories usually skip. The good people who go quiet, not because they agree, but because they can't afford the sentence they'd have to say out loud. Adam saw all of it. He didn't move. Darius crossed the floor to him, planted himself, and smiled the way a man smiles when he's about to enjoy himself. "Sir, this is a high-limit room. There's a minimum table buy-in of $50,000 and a dress standard." He let his eyes crawl down to the sandals. "I'm going to have to ask you to enjoy the rest of the property. The buffet's downstairs. I think you'd be more comfortable there." Adam looked up at him, calm, almost curious. "I'm not gambling, just having a water. Then you can have it somewhere else." Darius raised a gloved hand, and across the room a big man in a dark jacket started walking over. "We keep this room a certain way. You understand. It's nothing personal. It's nothing personal. Remember that one." He's going to say it again later, in a very different room, and it's going to sound like a man reading his own eulogy. The security guard reached them. It was Terrell Hayes, the same young man from the valet lane, moved inside for the evening shift, and when he saw who it was, his face did something complicated. He knew this guy had been polite. He knew this was wrong. He also had 2 kids and a lease and a boss watching him from across the floor. "Sir," Terrell said quietly, not meeting Adam's eyes, "I'm gonna have to walk you out. I'm sorry. I'm following the call." Adam stood up on his own before Terrell had to touch him. "It's all right, son. You're not the problem here." He looked once at Simone, who had frozen mid-step, with a tray of drinks in her hands and her jaw tight. Then he let himself be walked to the doors. And Darius, because a quiet exit wasn't enough for him, gave that shove at the threshold and delivered his line to the whole room. "This room's for high rollers, folks, not tourists in flip-flops." That's where we started. Now here's where it turns. because Darius didn't stop at throwing him out. Men like Darius never do. Over the next hour, he wrote it up. He filed an incident report, claiming the man in the shorts had been disorderly and aggressive towards staff, none of which had happened. And he recommended the guest be added to the property-wide banned list. He stood at the pit station telling two of his regulars about it, laughing, and he ended it with the line he said, the way other men say their favorite prayer. That's how you keep the sapphire clean. Then he found Simone. You made me look bad, letting that in here, he said. You're off the floor. I'm cutting your Thursday and your Saturday. Maybe that teaches you whose side you're on. 2 shifts. For Simone Booker, 2 shifts was the difference between making Nia's tuition payment on time and not. She didn't argue. She nodded, blinked hard, and went back to wiping down a bar that was already clean because it was the only thing left in that room she was still allowed to control. Out in the corridor, through the smoked glass, a man in baggy shorts stood watching her wipe that bar, and something in his face changed. Not anger, exactly. Something quieter and much older. He'd been thrown out of nicer rooms than this and shrugged it off. But he'd just watched a kind woman get punished for the crime of being kind to him, and that he could not shrug off. He'd promised himself 30 years ago he never would. Let me tell you about 30 years ago. It's quick and it matters. There'd been a diner on a corner in Manhattan, open all night, and a young comic who'd just bombed so badly he'd decided to quit for good. He had 87 cents and no bus fare home. A waitress there, an older woman named Ruth Ellison, who called everybody baby and meant it, had watched him count that 87 cents twice. She'd set down a plate of eggs and toast he hadn't ordered and told him it was on her. When he tried to refuse, she said, "Baby, somebody fed me once when I was low. You just do the same for somebody someday and we're square." He'd kept the receipt from that night. 30 years. It was in his pocket right now, soft as cloth, folded into the shape of a promise. He'd been trying to keep it ever since. And tonight, a woman named Simone had fed him a glass of water and a bowl of pretzels and lost 2 shifts for it. So the promise came due. He took out his phone and made one call. The next morning, 9:58, 60th floor. The conference room of the Solstice Grand ran the length of the building, all glass. The whole desert laid out below. Around the table sat the leadership of the Meridian Hospitality Group, the company that owned the Solstice and 11 other resorts. Lawyers, the marketing chief, the head of operations, and at the head of it all, the CEO, a silver-haired man named Gerald Foster, who had personally spent 3 months chasing this deal. On the table sat a bound contract. On its cover, embossed in clean type, were the words Corner Booth Productions, and beneath, a $200 million agreement for the studio to shoot its next 3 films at the resort, to premiere them there, to make the Solstice Grand the on-screen home of one of the most beloved names in American entertainment. The whole property had been holding its breath for this signature for months. Gerald Foster kept checking his watch. He's traveling in today. Somebody make sure the private suite's ready. The presidential, top floor. And for God's sake, nobody let him wait in a line. The doors opened, and in walked the man from the Sapphire Room. Same cargo shorts, same soft t-shirt, same rubber sandals slapping the marble. For one long second, the room didn't understand what it was seeing. Then Gerald Foster rose out of his chair so fast it rolled back and hit the window. Mr. Sandler. His voice came out thin. "It's an honor, a real honor. We are so glad you're here. Corner booth is exactly what this resort needs." Adam shook his hand, easy and warm, like nothing in the world was wrong. "Good to meet you, Gerald. Nice building." He glanced at the contract on the table with his own name waiting on the signature line. Then he looked around at all of them, the lawyers, the operations chief, the marketing woman with her rehearsed smile. "Before we do this," he said gently, "I want to talk about last night. And I'd like a couple of your people up here. There's a pit boss on your high-limit floor, Darius Vaughn. Get him. And there's a cocktail server named Simone Booker. And a security officer, Terrell Hayes. Get them too." Nobody understood. But you don't tell a man who's about to sign $200 million that no. So they'd the calls. Darius Vaughn rode the elevator up, straightening his pocket square, certain he'd been summoned to personally serve some VIP. He walked into the conference room wearing his best smile, saw the guest of honor standing by the window, and the smile died on his face one muscle at a time. The shorts, the sandals, the plastic watch. He knew that man. He'd shoved that man through a door 12 hours ago. "Mr. Vaughn," Adam said, "you remember me." Darius's mouth worked. When the words came out, they came out exactly as you'd expect, because a man doesn't change his whole self in one elevator ride. "Sir, Mr. Sandler, I was protecting the standards of the room. That's my job. I had no way of knowing." "No," Adam said, and his voice stayed soft, which was somehow worse. "You didn't know. That's the whole point, isn't it?" He nodded to the operations chief, who had, at Adam's request that morning, pulled the footage. They played it on the big screen at the end of the room, the whole thing, the shove, the line about flip-flops, and the audio the pit station mic had picked up clean. Darius telling Simone not to waste champagne on strays, Darius laughing to the regulars that that's how you keep the sapphire clean, Darius cutting Simone's 2 shifts to teach her whose side she was on. The room was very quiet. Gerald Foster had gone the color of the desert, and then people started to stand up. Not the executives. Others. Simone Booker, who'd come up in her uniform not knowing why, and had watched the footage with her hand over her mouth, stood and said, in a shaking voice, "That's what happened, all of it. And it wasn't just last night. He does it all the time. We can't say anything." Terrell Hayes stood next, jaw tight, and said, "I walked that man out. I knew it was wrong, and I did it anyway, because I was scared for my job. I'm not scared right now." He's telling the truth. And from the doorway, an old man in an expensive coat, Clarence Dupree, a whale who'd played the Sapphire Room for 15 years and had been summoned out of curiosity, cleared his throat and said, "I've watched this man humiliate the help in that room for years and told myself it wasn't my business. I'm ashamed of that. It should have been my business a long time ago." 3 people. Then 4. The room had turned all the way around, and Darius Vaughn stood in the center of it, with his perfect pocket square, and nowhere to look. Adam Sandler didn't raise his voice. He never once raised his voice. He just walked over, stood in front of the man who'd shoved him, and said one thing. "You had a room full of people who mattered last night, Darius. Servers and dealers, and a woman who fed a stranger a glass of water for free. The problem is you only counted the chips. And here is the part that separates this from every story you've heard like it." Darius didn't sneer. He didn't storm out. He looked at the frozen frame of himself on that screen, glove flat against a man's back, mouth open mid-insult, and something in his face broke and let the light in. He'd spent 20 years believing that being the gatekeeper made him somebody, and in one silent second, he understood that all he'd ever guarded was his own smallness, and that he'd guarded it by stepping on people who had less than he did. His eyes went wet. His voice, when it came, was not the pit boss's voice. I don't know when I turned into this," he said, and it was the truest thing he'd said in years. Nobody comforted him. Some things you have to just stand in. Adam signed the contract that morning. But he added one clause in his own handwriting before his signature, and Corner Booth's lawyers made the Meridian Group initial every page of it. The studio's partnership was contingent on a full reform of how the resort treated its frontline workers. Fair scheduling, protection from retaliation, a real grievance process with teeth. $200 million in exchange for basic dignity. Gerald Foster signed it without one word of argument. And to his credit, he looked relieved too. Simone Booker got her 2 shifts back before lunch, along with a promotion to guest experience manager for the high-limit floor. The same floor she'd been thrown around on for 11 years. A scholarship fund set up through the studio covered the rest of Nia's nursing school. Tuition paid in full, and Simone stood in the elevator afterward and cried in the way you cry. When a weight you'd carried so long you forgot it was there finally lifts off. She was also offered a small on-camera role, a diner waitress, in the first film to shoot at the resort. She said she'd have to check her schedule, and then she laughed, because for the first time in 11 years her schedule was hers. Terrell Hayes got a raise and a note, handwritten, that said only, "You told the truth when it cost you something. That's the whole job. Keep it up." A.S. he framed it, and Darius Vaughn was not fired. That surprised people. He was reassigned, moved off the Sapphire Room floor and down to the count room, in the basement, where the chips are sorted and stacked and counted, hour after hour, under fluorescent light, with no one to impress and no one to look down on. Just the standards he'd worshipped, weighed out in cold stacks all night long. Some people thought that was too soft, but there's a particular kind of reckoning in spending your days counting the only thing you ever thought was worth counting, and finding out it can't look back at you. He wrote Simone a letter a few weeks in. Short. It just said he was opistry, that he'd been thinking a lot down there in the quiet, and that he understood now she'd been the bigger person in that room the whole time. She read it, folded it, and put it in a drawer. She didn't write back, and she didn't have to. Some debts you pay by simply becoming a different man and hoping the people you hurt are somewhere better than you left them. The film premiered at the Solstice Grand 8 months later. Red carpet, searchlights, the whole desert glittering, and somewhere near the end of the night, while the executives gave their speeches, a heavy-set man in cargo shorts and rubber sandals slipped away from the noise and found the small bar out on the terrace, the cheap one, the one with the plastic chairs where the staff went to breathe. He sat down alone. A woman in a manager's blazer came out, saw him, and smiled. She set down a cup of coffee in front of him without being asked. "On the house on," Simone said. Adam Sandler laughed, soft, and looked out at the lights. He reached into the pocket of his shorts and took out a receipt, 30 years old, worn to the softness of cloth, and set it on the table next to the coffee cup. He didn't explain it. He just left it sitting there in the desert wind, one small paid debt beside another, while the searchlights swept the sky above a room full of people who'd finally figured out who mattered. If a story like this reminded you that the quiet ones are usually the ones holding everything up, do me a favor. Subscribe and stay for the next one. Because the next person somebody underestimates might just be the one who owns the whole building.